Have you ever walked into a room and immediately felt the presence of someone who commanded attention without saying a single word? Have you ever wondered why some people can dominate entire conversations while remaining almost completely silent? Maybe you found yourself constantly explaining, justifying, defending your position in every interaction, only to walk away, feeling drained and defeated. What if I told you that Friedrich Nietzsche discovered a psychological principle so powerful, so unsettling to others, that it can shift the entire dynamic of any relationship without you ever having to speak? What if the very act of remaining strategically silent could make others reveal their deepest insecurities, expose their hidden agendas, and ultimately hand you complete psychological control? Today, we're diving into one of Nietzsche's most dangerous insights, one that he buried deep within his philosophy because he understood its explosive potential. This isn't about being quiet or passive. This is about weaponizing presence itself, turning your silence into a force so magnetic and disturbing that others become compelled to fill the void, revealing everything you need to know about them in the process. But I must warn you, once you understand this principle and begin to apply it, you'll see human behavior differently forever. You'll recognize the desperate games people play for validation, and you'll realize that most conversations are nothing more than elaborate performances designed to mask profound insecurities. Are you ready to discover how to psychologically outmaneuver anyone without uttering a single word? Let's explore Nietzsche's most carefully guarded secret: the psychology of verbal dependency. Nietzsche understood something that modern psychology has only recently begun to confirm. Most human communication isn't about exchanging information, it's about managing anxiety. Every time someone feels compelled to explain themselves, justify their actions, or convince others of their worth, they're revealing a fundamental weakness. They need external validation to feel complete. Think about the last argument you had. Really think about it. Were you actually trying to discover truth, or were you trying to prove that you weren't wrong? Were you seeking understanding, or were you desperately attempting to maintain your self-image? Nietzsche called this the herd mentality, the pathological need to be seen as right, good, or acceptable by others. But here's what's fascinating. This need creates a psychological dependency. When you feel compelled to respond to every criticism, answer every question, or defend every position, you're essentially saying, "Your opinion of me matters more than my own understanding of myself." You're handing over your psychological sovereignty to whoever happens to be in front of you. Nietzsche saw this as a form of spiritual slavery. He wrote, "The individual has always had to struggle not to be overwhelmed by the tribe. Most people never escape this struggle because they don't recognize that every time they feel the urge to explain themselves, they're being controlled by others' expectations." This is why silence becomes so psychologically powerful. When you refuse to play the validation game, when you don't feel compelled to fill every pause with explanations or justifications, you're demonstrating something that most people find deeply unsettling: self-possession. You're showing that you don't need their approval to exist comfortably in your own skin. The person who can remain silent in the face of provocation, criticism, or even praise is demonstrating a level of psychological independence that makes others profoundly uncomfortable. Because in that silence, they're forced to confront their own desperate need for constant verbal reassurance. The mirror effect of strategic silence. Here's where Nietzsche's insight becomes truly powerful. When you remain strategically silent, you create what psychologists now call a projective space. Without your words to react to, without your explanations to argue against, other people are forced to fill the silence with their own psychological material, and in doing so, they reveal everything. Nietzsche understood that most people are uncomfortable with themselves. They use constant chatter, endless explanations, and compulsive storytelling to avoid confronting their own inner emptiness. But when you provide no verbal material for them to bounce off of, they're forced to sit with their own discomfort. And this discomfort makes them incredibly revealing. Watch what happens when you stop explaining yourself in conversations. Notice how others begin to over-explain. Notice how they start projecting motivations onto your silence. Are you angry? Did I say something wrong? What are you thinking? These aren't questions about you. They're expressions of their own anxiety about not being able to read and control you. This is what Nietzsche called the will to power in its purest form. Not the crude desire to dominate others through force or manipulation, but the subtle art of maintaining your own psychological center while others lose theirs. When you're not reactive, when you're not seeking their approval or validation, you become a psychological black hole that draws out their deepest insecurities. The truly skilled practitioner of this art learns to use silence as a surgical instrument. A raised eyebrow at the right moment, a slight pause before responding, a refusal to fill an uncomfortable silence. These seemingly minor actions can completely shift the power dynamic of any interaction because they force others to question their own certainty. But there's something even deeper happening here. When you refuse to engage in the constant give and take of validation seeking, you're demonstrating what Nietzsche called amor fati, love of fate. You're showing that you're comfortable with whatever response your silence generates because you're not dependent on others' reactions to feel complete. The Übermensch and psychological sovereignty. Nietzsche's concept of the Übermensch, the overman, is often misunderstood as some kind of superior human being who dominates others. But the real Übermensch is someone who has achieved complete psychological sovereignty. They don't need to prove anything to anyone because they've transcended the herd's value system entirely. The Übermensch doesn't remain silent because they're afraid to speak. They remain silent because they've realized that most conversation is just noise, desperate attempts by insecure people to feel important, understood, or validated. They've moved beyond the need for external approval, which means they can observe human behavior with complete clarity. This psychological sovereignty is what makes the Übermensch so unsettling to others. When you encounter someone who genuinely doesn't need your approval, who isn't seeking your validation, who isn't afraid of your disapproval, it forces you to confront your own psychological dependencies. Most people find this deeply uncomfortable. But here's the paradox. The less you need others' approval, the more they want to give it to you. The less you seek validation, the more others feel compelled to validate you. This isn't manipulation. It's a natural psychological response to encountering genuine self-possession. Nietzsche understood that true power comes from within. When you develop the ability to remain psychologically centered, regardless of external circumstances, you develop what he called the strength to stand alone. And this strength is magnetic because it's so rare. Most people spend their entire lives seeking external confirmation of their worth. They need constant reassurance that they're good, smart, attractive, successful. But the Übermensch has moved beyond these needs. They've created their own value system, and they live according to their own standards rather than society's expectations. This is why strategic silence is so powerful. It's not about being passive or withdrawn. It's about demonstrating that you don't need others' verbal participation to feel complete. You're comfortable with yourself, with uncertainty, with being misunderstood. And this comfort is deeply threatening to people who depend on constant external validation. The art of psychological positioning. Now that you understand the psychological principles behind strategic silence, let's explore how to apply this knowledge practically. Nietzsche wasn't just a philosopher, he was a master psychologist who understood how to position himself advantageously in any social situation. The first principle is what I call selective engagement. You don't remain silent all the time. That would make you seem withdrawn or passive. Instead, you choose your moments to speak with surgical precision. When you do speak, your words carry weight because they're rare. People lean in to hear what you have to say because they know you don't waste words. The second principle is comfortable discomfort. Most people try to ease tension in conversations by filling silences with chatter. But tension is information. When someone is uncomfortable with silence, they're revealing their own insecurities. Learn to sit comfortably with other people's discomfort. Don't rush to rescue them from their own anxiety. The third principle is emotional non-reactivity. This doesn't mean being cold or unfeeling. It means not allowing others' emotional states to dictate your responses. When someone is angry, you don't need to become defensive. When someone is trying to provoke you, you don't need to take the bait. Your emotional state remains stable regardless of what's happening around you. The fourth principle is strategic mystery. Nietzsche understood that predictability is weakness. When people can anticipate your responses, they can manipulate you. But when you maintain an element of mystery, when you don't always reveal your thoughts or feelings, you keep others slightly off balance. They can't quite figure you out, which makes you endlessly fascinating. This isn't about being deceptive or manipulative. It's about maintaining your psychological autonomy. You don't owe anyone access to your inner world. You choose what to reveal and when to reveal it. This selective disclosure makes your authentic sharing more valuable when it does occur. The final principle is presence over performance. Most people are constantly performing, trying to be funny, smart, agreeable, or impressive. But the Übermensch simply exists. Their presence is enough. They don't need to entertain others or seek approval. This authentic presence is magnetic because it's so unusual in a world full of performers. Breaking free from reactive patterns. The most challenging aspect of applying these principles is breaking free from your own reactive patterns. Most of us have been conditioned since childhood to explain ourselves, to seek approval, to fill uncomfortable silences. Nietzsche called this conditioning the slave morality, a value system that keeps us psychologically dependent on others. Recognizing these patterns is the first step to freedom. Notice when you feel compelled to explain yourself. Notice when you automatically agree with others to avoid conflict. Notice when you fill silences because the quiet makes you uncomfortable. These automatic responses are chains that bind you to others' expectations. Breaking these patterns requires what Nietzsche called the courage to be disliked. You must be willing to let others misunderstand you. You must be comfortable with their disapproval. You must accept that some people will find your self-possession threatening or off-putting. This is the price of psychological freedom. But here's what's remarkable. As you become more comfortable with others' discomfort, as you stop trying to manage their emotions or seek their approval, you begin to attract different types of people. You begin to draw in those who appreciate authenticity over performance, depth over surface charm, presence over constant chatter. The people who are threatened by your silence and self-possession are revealing their own insecurities. They need constant external validation, and your independence makes them uncomfortable with their own dependencies. But the people who are drawn to your calm presence, who appreciate your selective engagement, who respect your boundaries, these are the relationships worth cultivating. Nietzsche wrote, "What does not kill me makes me stronger." Every time you resist the urge to explain yourself, every time you remain silent in the face of provocation, every time you refuse to seek validation, you're strengthening your psychological sovereignty. You're becoming more authentically yourself. the transformation of power dynamics. As you master the art of strategic silence, you'll notice something profound happening in your relationships. The power dynamics begin to shift. People who once dominated conversations through volume or aggression find themselves unsettled by your calm presence. Those who relied on emotional manipulation discover that their tactics no longer work on you. This transformation happens because you're no longer playing by the old rules. You're not competing for attention, seeking validation, or trying to prove your worth. You've stepped outside the game entirely, and this gives you tremendous power. When you're not invested in winning arguments or being right, you can see situations with perfect clarity. Nietzsche understood that true power comes from this kind of detachment. Not emotional coldness, but psychological freedom. When you're not desperately seeking approval, when you're not afraid of disapproval, when you're comfortable with being misunderstood, you become virtually unmanipulatable. People will try various strategies to draw you into their emotional dramas. They'll provoke you, test you, try to make you react. But your silence and calm presence reveal these attempts for what they are: desperate bids for psychological control. And when these tactics fail, the manipulator is left exposed and vulnerable. This is why Nietzsche's approach is so effective. You're not fighting fire with fire. You're not trying to out-argue or out-manipulate others. You're simply refusing to play the game. And in a world where everyone is competing for attention and validation, the person who doesn't need either becomes extraordinarily powerful. But with this power comes responsibility. Nietzsche believed that those who achieve psychological sovereignty have a duty to use their influence wisely. Your silence and presence can heal or harm, inspire or intimidate. The goal isn't to dominate others, but to model a different way of being in the world. Living as your own authority. The ultimate goal of mastering strategic silence isn't to control others, it's to become your own authority. Nietzsche's Übermensch doesn't need external validation because they've developed an internal compass that guides their actions. They've become their own judge, their own audience, their own source of meaning. This internal authority is what makes strategic silence so powerful. When you know who you are and what you value, when you've developed genuine self-respect and self-understanding, you no longer need others' approval to feel complete. Your silence comes from a place of fullness, not emptiness. Most people remain silent out of fear, insecurity, or confusion. But the silence we're discussing comes from confidence, clarity, and choice. You're not quiet because you don't know what to say. You're selective about when you speak because you understand the power of your words and presence. This transformation doesn't happen overnight. It requires consistent practice, continuous self-examination, and the courage to stand alone when necessary. But as you develop this internal authority, you'll find that your relationships become more authentic, your boundaries become stronger, and your influence becomes more profound. Nietzsche wrote, "Become who you are." This journey toward authentic selfhood requires shedding the masks, roles, and performances that others expect from you. It means disappointing those who want you to remain small, predictable, and manageable. It means choosing your own values over society's expectations. But the reward is immense: complete psychological freedom. The ability to move through the world without needing others' permission, approval, or validation. The power to influence others through presence alone. The peace that comes from knowing exactly who you are and being comfortable with that truth. So here's your challenge. For the next week, practice strategic silence. When someone tries to provoke you, don't take the bait. When you feel the urge to explain yourself, pause and consider whether explanation is really necessary. When conversations become draining or manipulative, quietly withdraw your energy. Notice what happens. Notice how others react to your silence. Notice their discomfort, their projections, their attempts to draw you back into reactive patterns. But most importantly, notice how you feel when you're not constantly seeking approval or avoiding disapproval. This is your path to psychological sovereignty. This is how you become someone who can influence others without saying a word, not through manipulation or dominance, but through the rare and magnetic quality of authentic self-possession. Remember, the weak speak constantly because they fear silence. The strong remain silent because they understand its power. The wise choose when to break their silence because they know the value of their words. If this resonates with you, if you're ready to claim your psychological sovereignty, comment below. I choose silence as strength. Let's begin this transformation together. The world doesn't need more noise. It needs more people who understand the profound power of strategic silence. Will you be one of them?